Hey everyone, and welcome to Dad to Dad's podcast. I'm Robert, and today Adam and I get the pleasure of speaking with Joe Fernandez. Joe, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Adam has spoken very highly of you for a long time, and again, I just want to thank you for agreeing to come on the show, spending some time on the Dad to Dad's podcast. So you and Adam go way back to your playing days at Fresno State, where you both were wide receivers and played for Coach Pat Hill. We had Coach Hill on the show several days ago. What was it like playing for Coach Hill?
Coach Hill was he was a great coach to play for. I kind of had a little bit of history coming in and heard some stories about Coach Hill because he actually was a graduate assistant when my dad first started playing in college at Utah. And so I came in with him being the head coach and the leader of the team. And immediately felt, his presence as a leader. And I will say, above and beyond being a coach, just a good person. I mean, he's, besides the stuff he taught us about football, really just being a young man and going through that phase in your life, it was great having him and the rest of the staff truly there.
That's great. So after college, you had a great college career. After college, you didn't get drafted, but you pursued the professional ranks. Tell me about that.
Yeah. So during the draft, it was about, I think at that time it was 7 rounds. And after the 6th round, I believe, is when I started getting, calls from my agent. Looked like it might not happen. And started to hear from different teams that already wanted to sign me. And so I ended up signing with the Seahawks. Went to training camp. And honestly, I kind of knew, though, in a very short amount of time, having a dad that played football, that it didn't feel right. It wasn't for me. I stuck it out. I played the whole preseason, ended up getting released, did a tryout. We can go to that more later if you want. But I enjoyed the experience. I learned a lot from it. But it was interesting. I would say my experience was a lot different from most people in terms of how I felt about going into the NFL, what I was expecting to do.
Joe, may I interject?
Please.
because I remember what happened. Okay, so
okay,
you had a couple of workouts. So I live in Atlanta. So after you were cut by Seattle, you flew to Tampa. Is that correct or not?
Tampa Bay was the workout that I went to. Okay,
so he did a workout in Tampa. He worked out, probably did much better than the other guys. And they chose guys. So Joe will talk about potential. They chose guys based on potential, right? And then so Joe flew home to California and he worked out for the San Francisco 49ers. And that's where he reached his boiling or his inflection point is what you'd call it.
I never worked out for San Francisco.
Oh, so you didn't actually go to it?
I got a call from them.
Yeah, okay.
Maybe like 3 weeks later, and they wanted to sign me, and I said, I'm not doing a workout. And they said, we don't want you to do a workout.
And that's when I called Joe, and I was just like, dude, you got to go work out. What what are you doing, man? Like, go work out, brother. And, I had so much respect for him as a player, but he reached a point where he was like, nah, I'm not playing this bullshit anymore. So that's what I remember.
And Joe, I wonder too. You kind of had an inside track there with your dad.
Yeah.
And you did, and so you kind of knew what to expect, where this was heading or wasn't heading, and that's one thing I really want to hear about too. Is your dad? For those that don't know, Joe's dad is Swervin Mervyn Fernandez, who played professionally for several years, played both the NFL as well as the CFL, and the CFL Hall of Fame. I think most remember it as, or at least I most remember him as being a Raider. He was with the Los Angeles Raiders at the time, right? And just what a phenomenal wide receiver. Just super smooth. Just a thing of beauty in that position. Paint me a picture of what it was like growing up with Swervin Mervyn as your dad, as a dad that's playing professional football and, being the son of him. I would imagine that there's a lot of perks that us regular guys don't see.
It broke up just a little bit, but I think I caught that, right? Growing up with a dad who's a star, especially at that time, right? I mean, I didn't know it then, so it's more of kind of, I guess, looking back, right, and understanding who he was. For me, and I think that was why my experience was so different from a lot of guys. To me, the football aspect of it wasn't fun. Like, it sounds crazy, but growing up with a dad in the NFL, I didn't like it. He was gone. So what happened was both my dad and my mom, they got married right out of high school. They're both from San Jose. He was with the LA Raiders. When he played in Canada, I was born in Canada. We moved to Canada. We lived there as a family. We lived in LA, but when my older brother became school age, my mom knew that this wasn't going to last forever and wanted us growing up around family. And so the decision was made to move back to San Jose. We had a place in LA. My dad still had a condo, and I remember he would play a game on Sunday, typically Mondays off. So he would fly home right after the game, be with us Monday, and then immediately fly back. So in season, I didn't see my dad. I saw him a couple times, and we tried to make trips, but that wasn't very fun. And not knowing, I had no idea who he was. I had no idea what to expect. To me, it was just, when I would go to my dad's work, it was the best playground ever. Like, we'd be at the training camp. My brother and I would get on our skateboards on the treadmills, and while they're in the meetings, we'd be riding on skateboards on the treadmills, just causing a huge amount of disturbance in the locker room.
That's crazy, man.
I've never even thought about that, skateboard on the treadmill.
Oh, it's the best.
That sounds like a great playground. And I can't imagine the people you met. So when he was on the team, there was Marcus, and tell me if I'm wrong, and I know I'm missing it, Marcus Allen, Bo Jackson, Howie Long, Ronnie Lott, Eric Dickerson, Willie Gault.
Yeah.
Right? Weren't all those? I mean, just a bunch of greats.
I don't remember Eric Dickerson, but for sure Willie Gault.
Okay.
They had absolute hilarious stories. And I'm trying to think. Sean Alexander. I think it was Sean Alexander. Might have been another one. But that was Al Davis wanted speed, right? That was his big thing. He wanted speed, and so they always had fast guys. And similar to the NFL now. You go for speed, sometimes you give up hands. And I wish I can remember the name. But being in LA, so one of the pranks my dad told me is he came out to practice one time. And because they're in LA with the Mickey Mouse gloves, the huge gloves, and I can't remember which receiver it was. One of those receivers on the team, they were making fun of him that these are the gloves he needs to wear because he couldn't catch. So they're running around with these massive Mickey Mouse gloves, just messing with everyone. I heard stories about Bo Jackson messing around with Bo. My dad told me a story one time. Sorry, I got a dog in the background scratching to get out.
That's all right.
But he told me a story one time about Bo. And picking on Bo, and I don't know if he's talked about this publicly, but Bo initially, I'm sure you could see if you look at interviews, he used to he had a stutter. And so, his teammates they were giving him a hard time. Well, Bo wasn't having it this day. And in the middle of practice, my dad said something or made fun of him. And my dad was telling me Bo Jackson was chasing him around. My dad's running from him because he doesn't want to get caught by Bo. And so to me, these are all things that friends do, right? And you hang out. And so to me, that's what the NFL was. It was being around a group of friends, having fun, and playing a game. It wasn't money. It wasn't fame. It wasn't any of that. That stuff never clicked in my head.
Yeah, I guess too young to realize that. And then, there's obviously, and you've said it, there's pluses and minuses, right, of being a kid whose dad's a professional. And one of the pluses definitely going on rampages through the training room and also meeting everybody. That's pretty cool, though. It's to be able to meet all those people as well.
Yeah, to have that experience. Art Shell used to pick me up, hang me upside down, and dip me in the cold pool.
Really?
We would.
So cool.
The one thing that my brother and I do remember and always talk about to this day is, and you know, in NFL locker rooms, like most locker rooms now, they're all stocked with everything you could want. Gatorade, sodas, right? Like gum, anything like that. And they used to have these big tubs of vitamin C, like big vitamin C tablets that essentially tasted like Flintstone vitamins. Just pure sugar. Like, I don't know if this was just vitamin C. So we would just go get handfuls of this stuff and start just shoveling it down like it was candy. In the meantime, everyone's off in meeting rooms, and here's, you know, Mervin's kids just running. I think, and Howie's boys are our age too, so I know they were there, you know, occasionally as well.
Yeah.
But like, I just remember my brother and I, like, just causing a ruckus the whole time.
Joe, you know what's funny? You mentioned Howie's boy. We actually played against Chris when he was a freshman at Virginia. I had no idea.
That's right.
So Chris, like when we played in the MPC Bowl, like I have a picture of like I'm catching a ball, like cutting back against Derek Brooks, and Chris is in the background, and I had no idea he was on the field. Like that was before he became a monster.
Yeah.
So he didn't get a ton of burn that day, but Chris Long, dude. So he is exactly our age, or a couple of years younger. So
that's pretty cool.
Kind of crazy.
That's pretty cool. One thing, another thing I want to hear about is, and I don't think many people know about this. I didn't know about it until Adam told me, but about your dad stepping away from his professional career. Tell me more about that. Cause it was like, here's this guy that's just on top, and then he stepped away. Tell me about that.
So Adam and I were actually talking about this recently. And I feel like the story has evolved over time.
Sure.
But essentially, so what happened, and this is from my dad's own words, was he went out to practice one day and essentially felt like, I can't do this anymore. I don't want to do this anymore. I want to be home with my family. And the day he retired, I'm trying to think, I think it was Coach Flores. I think Coach Flores was the coach when he retired. And he told Fred Biletnikoff was his receiver coach, hey, I'm done. I mean, it was like I'm done. I'm not doing it. And it was like, well, hang on. You know, Coach Flores wants to talk to you before you leave. And so my dad waited, went through practice afterwards, talked to Coach Flores and went up to him and said, hey, I think I'm done. I want to retire. Coach Flores stuck his hand out and said, good luck. There was no talk of trying to keep him, nothing like that. And I think it led to it. I believe as a father and kind of going through, you know, high stresses, right? Where you're working too much, you're not seeing your family. We were always together and he was in LA alone. And I know how it felt as a kid not having him there.
Yeah.
And I always had the feeling that like, he probably had that same feeling, right?
Yeah.
Of wanting to be home and then the job not being as fun. And truthfully, like, I think he played at the time. Well, he did play at the time, right? Where when he got drafted to the Raiders, he got drafted when he was still in Canada. And he had, I think, 2 or 3 years left in his contract that he had to play out before he can get to the Raiders. The first year he got there was a year they went on strike. So he was on strike, you know, on the picket lines too with all the other players. And that's when they formed the collective bargaining agreement. That's when you start to see free agency come in. I mean, essentially good and bad, right? It became way more of a business for the athletes. It was always a business for the owners, but it became more of the athletes have skin in the game. And I think probably a lot of things that, you know, once that piece, his kids getting older, his kids being in school, missing things, he didn't have it anymore to do it and play when physically, I mean, everyone I talk to always says like your dad could have played for probably 10 more years.
Yeah. I mean, that's what it seemed like, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it did. 'Cause it was like, okay, it's not an injury.
Yeah.
But you know, I guess when you lose that love and then you've got I respect that, you know, 'cause I'm sure there's a lot of guys out there now that are still playing, probably hate it, don't love the game, and they're sacrificing their family. You know, kudos to your dad, man. Props to him for realizing that and doing it, and like, hey, I want to spend this time with my family, man. I've missed I've missed a good bit, and I don't want to miss any more.
Sorry, Coach Hill had a great metaphor for it, and he said it was called losing your fastball, is what he said. It's like, so in my experience, like I kind of experienced something very similar, where I wanted to be somewhere else more than I wanted to be on the football field. And Joe attests to this. Like, every time I stepped onto the football field, I was very much so present. But when I had kids and a family and somewhere else I wanted to be, I had to be there. And Mervyn's a great example of that. Like, he just had to be somewhere else. And losing your fastball. Like, I no longer wanted to fight people. I was just like, look, I've got a son. I need to leave.
Yeah.
No, it's respectable though. I mean, it really is.
And I will say this. I do think that, and when I've said it's evolved, one of the things that now my dad and I can talk about as adults who have adult, issues and challenges is, in hindsight, even with me playing football, right? I knew I didn't want to play anymore, but there was a lot of regret, right?
Yeah.
Because you don't get to go back to the NFL.
Right.
Like, when you make that decision, it's pretty much unless you're Tom Brady or some of these guys who retire that come out, who aren't officially retired.
Right.
When you truly decide I'm done and I step away, that you don't just go back. Right. And so, for me, I definitely felt a lot of regret and what if, the what ifs, what if I would have just hung it out? Right.
Yeah.
Because then life comes. And I'm working a regular job, and the NFL contracts are gone, and not quick, right? But I'm in it now. And so, talking to my dad, I think the decision still would have been the same, but the rashness of the decision, right?
Yeah.
I mean, if you think about even all of us now in the regular business world, it's a lot easier to walk into a job you don't like anymore and say, "Hey, boss, I quit," knowing that you could just go across and join another firm. But when you're in the NFL and you decide you're going to quit, it's not really a decision you should make that quickly without consulting, without looking, okay, what are the pros and cons of this? And like I said, I think the decision would have been the same, but working through that to help you, accelerate that next phase of life, I think is very important for any NFL athlete. Because I think everyone in the NFL, like Adam says, gets to that point where you lose your fastball. But that transition between the NFL and then getting what we all probably consider like a normal job, sometimes people make that easy. Sometimes that's incredibly difficult for people.
Yeah.
So when you make a decision to end football, it's hard.
Yeah. So you were when you were going to the league or trying to get in the league, were you married yet to Jen, or were you married yet, or were you dating?
We weren't married, but we were engaged.
Okay, so, well, the reason why I asked, I wonder if subconsciously in your mind, you're thinking about years down the road, and you're thinking about, okay, this is somebody I'm getting married. We're about to get married. We will have children. Maybe I don't want that same life for them that I had. Maybe Absolutely. I want to be available. And I wonder if that was kind of part of the decision
Absolutely.
Process. Yeah.
It was. I know for me, one of the advantages of having a dad who played in the NFL and did very well was they grew up in a tough neighborhood in San Jose. Both my mom and my dad didn't really have money. The one thing that they really wanted for us was a good education.
Yeah.
And so my brother and sisters and I went to all the private college preparatory schools in the Bay Area. And one of the things that I noticed was, people look at NFL athletes all the time and think, oh my God, like, what a life. They're so wealthy. They have all this money. And I remember when I was in high school and going to some of my friends' houses and thinking, your parents don't play sports. Like, why is your house so, and realizing, holy cow, like, what do your parents do to make this kind of money? Yeah. And it was just this whole new world that I was exposed to. And so when I got there, I knew, like, for me, football wasn't a ticket.
Yeah.
In fact, it was the opposite. It was something that was just going to potentially hold you back that's how I saw it, was because
Yeah.
when football's over, if you play, for me, I wasn't my dad. I wasn't 6'3", running a 4.3 40. I was 5'10", trying to make it with the 4.5 and undersized. That if I play in the NFL and I last 3 years, 5 years, when I come out, I'm going to be competing in the business world with guys that are out of Stanford
True.
MBAs and and I've got to compete with them to earn a living for the rest of my life. And I was actually fearful that the NFL would delay my life.
Interesting.
Wow.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
So with your dad, with all the success he had, he has to be a very driven person. I mean, he's achieved a lot, probably extremely motivated. What traits and values did he have that maybe he instilled in you? Obviously work ethic, right?
I lost. I think it was, I would say the biggest trait that he instilled in me was how humble he was. Honestly, like, I saw how hard he worked when it came to sports. And I would say, again, because I was so young, it was more of the transition out of football that shaped, how hard of a worker I knew he was. So he decided to retire from the NFL without any kind of plan. He had 3 kids. We were all in private school. Essentially, from what I understand, had he just played like 3 more years, and with his contract, financially they would have been set for life.
Wow.
And he stopped 3 years before that, right? And so now what? So he had to go and get a job, and the most important thing was insurance. So he went from, I think there was an article one time of like, he was in the top 10 of the highest paid receivers in the NFL, to his transition, his first job out of the NFL, he worked for Dreyer's Ice Cream. Someone knew him and said, "Hey, Mervyn Fernandez, come, we want to give you a job."
Yeah.
His job, he did merchandising, he worked with the stores, but he was driving a truck for Dreyer's Ice Cream.
Wow.
Like, he would wake up at 3 a.m, go to Dreyer's Ice Cream in San Bruno, and he didn't know. He's never driven a semi truck in his life. And we weren't broke. They had millions of dollars in the bank. Yeah. But his focus on, I need insurance, let me hurry up and get it. He went and got the first thing he could and did it. And never complained. I never saw him come home and mope around about, why am I doing this job? Why do I have to do this? He did it, and he did it for us. And so, living in the areas we lived in, his pride never took a hit. And that was as a young kid, seeing that, I started to understand, from that, how hard this man must work. He will do whatever it takes to provide and support and do what he needs to do with his family. Pride aside, it doesn't matter. He'll make it happen. And he did that. He's done that, throughout his whole life. Whatever he has to do, he will do. And I think that has probably been the biggest thing that I've taken away, is there's really no quitting him. He doesn't always have the answers, but he definitly tries, right? He's definitely going to put in his full effort.
Yeah. What's the epitome of humility there? From being a star receiver, constant highlights on ESPN, and then driving a truck and not complaining, doing it for his family. That's
and he continued to move. He did different things, and he's always enjoyed, found joy in the different things that he's done. And my dad, both my dad and my mom, for their lack of experiences in life, except for the NFL, I feel like the knowledge they passed on to me has been tremendous. Like, my dad's advice has always been spot on. Like, when I decided to quit in the NFL, I remember after the Minnesota, like Adam was saying, after I went to Minnesota and did a workout, which, by the way, the receiver coach, the Minnesota.
I thought it was Tampa.
It was Tampa Bay. So Tampa Bay was the first workout. John Gruden was a coach. I knew John Gruden because when I was in high school, my dad would go and do like rounds at the Raiders Stadium. He would still see the team. You know, they're really good to their alumni, so they would invite him back. So Gruden knew my dad. So I'm doing the workout. After the workout's over, I'm in the cafeteria eating. John Gruden sees me and goes, "Fernandez, come over here," and calls me over to his table. Is like, "I love watching you at Fresno State." And I'm thinking in my mind, great, my wife and I are going to end up living in Tampa Bay. I guess this is where we're going to settle. Fast forward to, okay, the player personnel wants to talk to the 3 guys who worked out. I ended up not getting picked. Fly home. I have a workout with Minnesota lined up, and I'm supposed to fly out the next day. Fly home. My dad picks me up, and I go, "I don't want to go, Dad. I'm done. I want to quit." And he said, "Why?" And I said, "I'm just so tired of this. I'm tired of the politics. Like, I have film in preseason. These guys know what I can do. And I'm just so tired of the politics," because essentially when I did that workout, there were 3 guys there. One was an Olympic skier from Colorado, Jeremy Bloom, who was a draft pick earlier. Great, awesome player, right? And the other guy he was Eli Manning's backup in college. And they had converted him to a wide receiver. And he had already been in the NFL for a year, but was on practice squad. So we did our drills. And I'll never forget, the player personnel guy looked at all 3 of us and said, "Jeremy, you did a great job tracking punts. You're a solid punt returner. Routes are really good. But we still think you're favoring your ankle. You got to show a little bit of injury. We'd love to see you healthy." Look at me. They go, "Joe, great job tracking punts. Your routes are incredibly crisp. Your hands are amazing. Like, you'll probably find yourself on an active roster this year." Looks at the 3rd guy and says, "You could do a better job tracking punts. Your routes aren't as crisp, but you show great explosion. We're going to sign you today." And I was like, this is after John Gruden called me over and had a conversation, like personally called me over, right, to have this conversation with me.
Are you like, what the fuck? Come on.
I'm like, what do you mean? What else can I do?
Are you serious right now?
I'm thinking, what else can I do? And so anyways, that was kind of that's what started me going, this is ridiculous. I'm done. So I'm telling my dad about the politics of it.
Yeah.
And for my dad, not being in corporate America or anything like that, he said, "Well, what do you think is going to be different?" And I was like, "Well, this is the NFL, right? Like, the politics are at a whole different level." And he said, "You honestly think it's going to be different?" And I said, in my mind, I did. But then I said, well, that and like, I don't want to play anymore. Like, I don't want to get hit. I remember saying, I don't want to get hit. Like, I don't want to catch the ball over the middle. And he goes, and like his eyes kind of lit up, and he goes, "Then you need to quit because you're going to get hurt if you're afraid to get hit." And then he goes, "You want to go bowling?" So then we went bowling. And I called Minnesota on the way and said, "Hey, I'm not coming." They got mad at me because they'd already bought a plane ticket for me. And I just said, "Hey, look, I'm really sorry." A couple hours later, I got a call from the receiver coach who knew my dad. And I was honest. I said, "Look, I'm not going to do a workout for someone again and put myself through this." He goes, "Joe, I would have signed you anyways. You don't have to." And I said, "Well, thanks, but no thanks."
Joe, hold on. What was that? Was that Terry Ribisky or who was the George Stewart?
I don't think it was Terry Ribisky, but it would have been Bernard Berrien's receiver coach, because I think Bernard was
okay.
There
I was thinking because George Stewart was my he was my receivers coach when I was a rookie, and he went up to Minnesota the next year.
I think it was George. I think that name sounds familiar.
Yeah, so he dubbed me Little Man when I got here. It was one of the worst nicknames I've ever had. The whole goddamn team was calling me Little Man. It was like,
I'm making a note right now.
And I'm like, I get into corporate America, I'm like a regular size player, a little bit bigger than most people. But I was called Little Man for a whole goddamn year because of that, man. So.
Which Adam does not like that.
I promise you, I'm making a note right now.
He's like, Little Man. He's like, I'm Little Man. You got some shit in your ass. I was like,
from now on, it's going to be Robert and Little Man Adam Jennings.
There you go.
Little Man.
So, I mean, what great advice by your dad. And just, to kind of lean on him, he knew. And just, okay. I mean,
and he was right, by the way, right?
Yeah.
Like, the politics in the business world are just as bad. I mean, it's just a business, right? I mean, there's politics in anything, and there's challenges with anything, and I constantly going back to him for advice, and for him not, having ever been in I feel like the corporate world and climbing that corporate ladder, his advice has always been sound and spot on, and it's honestly, it's been a real blessing. Both him and my mom have just been a real good foundation to kind of bring me back to earth and, help me see things for just kind of how they are.
That's great to hear. And, Adam, I can see why you've always spoken so highly of Joe. I definitely can. And as we were leading up to this, Adam and I spoke many times, and he's just the coolest, most down-to-earth, humble guy. And we see where that comes from, right? I mean, that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
And hey, so fast forward to today. You're a loan officer at U.S. Bank, married to your college sweetheart. Props on that. You have a son that's 6 and then a daughter that's 14.
Yeah.
How is fatherhood going?
Wow. Well, it is. It's the one thing that, especially being an athlete, right? You think you can prepare for this stuff, and then you realize how ill prepared you are. Exactly. And they're so different, right? Like both my kids are so different. We have a big age gap, not massive, but like a big age gap between the two. That initially, when we planned and talked about in college, how many kids do we want to have, how close together, it didn't work out that way, and it's been fun though, right? I mean, and like any parent would say, it's hard, it's rewarding, it's frustrating.
Yeah.
Joe, let me ask you this. In addition to what Robert just asked, tell me about raising your daughter. Tell me about that, like being a girl dad.
So a lot of people, and I don't know if it's just, the sports world and football, right? And kind of, I think the assumptions that come with that, right? Like, oh, you want your son and you want him to play football. And I remember when we found out that we were pregnant and thinking like, gosh, I don't want a son because I know how I was. With a daughter, though, it's like the possibilities are endless, right? Maybe she won't be like me. And that's honestly how
you can warn her about people like Adam, right?
Yeah,
I mean, no, I'm
exactly. And, just kind of how, I guess being open to experiencing something different. I was always excited to have a girl and to be, that father who was around with her different sports or different activities, and to see the types of things that she would get into. What I will say is she was a lot easier younger than my son. And obviously she's 14 right now, so she's going through her teenage years.
Yeah.
And it's a whole nother learning curve, right? To get through and to try to be supportive of her. And, I think the biggest thing that I've just tried to do with both of them though, is instill confidence. Right. And I wasn't, my wife was a much better student. I was a good student. I wouldn't say I was a bad student, but I didn't put the time and effort I think I could have or should have. And things just come easy to her. She gets good grades. She does everything right. She doesn't cause any problems. So it's easy. But I think the biggest thing I feel like where I can help is just try to continue to support her and give her confidence and push her out and help her test her limits, because essentially to me, I think that's the most important thing. If she can go through life with confidence, everything else will take care of itself. Relationships, work, she's going to fall down. She's going to have issues. She started off with some of the biggest issues in life when she was born, and just being able to get through them and be able to look back and see what she's achieved is one of the things that I try to instill in both my kids.
Tell me about that. We'll go back to raising a daughter because I can't imagine that. I have 2 sons, and I remember the ultrasounds with both of them. I never thought I'd have sons. I always thought I don't want to say cursed with girls, but I just thought that was what God had planned for me, or daughters. And I still remember the ultrasounds. Like, that's a penis. oh, it's a peanut. He's got one. You know, and then with the next one, same thing. It's like, yes. But you mentioned she started off with issues. Tell me, she was premature, right?
She was. So
she was a preemie. So
Bella was born at 26 weeks. She was 1 pound, 16 ounces.
Oh my gosh.
She was our first, so we had no idea what to expect. I mean, my wife was reading the what to expect when you're expecting book.
Yeah.
And she was tracking with where she was. And I remember we hadn't gone to any kind of birthing classes. We hadn't done any of that stuff yet. We had nothing. We didn't have, we didn't have any of
it's
the
so
stuff.
early, right?
It was so early. And I remember I was actually, for the job that I had, I was playing in a golf tournament. I was doing some marketing for a casino near Fresno prior to transitioning into mortgage. And I got a call from my parents. They were down in LA. My sister was competing in the state championship for track. So all my family was, sorry about that. All my family was in LA, meaning my sister-in-law, my brother, my sister was competing. My parents were down in LA. All the women in my family, including my wife, were on a women's trip up north of San Francisco. My wife had started bleeding the night before. Thank goodness she was with all the women in my family because they realized we got to get you to the hospital.
Right.
So they're driving down to the hospital. I get a call from my mom saying, actually, I'm sorry. It was my dad. My dad was the one that called, and he said, I woke up in Reno because I was at a golf tournament in Reno at 7, 6 in the morning.
That's actually the one that I missed the flight for, right?
Yeah, that's the one you missed.
Damn it. I remember that. I was supposed to be there.
So he says, Joe, your wife's bleeding, and you should probably go down to the hospital. And I'm like, okay. Okay. The way my dad, I was just, okay, let me get out of here. Let me go. Everyone's got their golf bags. They're all waiting for the bus to take them to the course. And I'm running out with my luggage and jump in the car and start heading home. And as I'm heading from Reno back to Marin County is the hospital. So from Reno to San Francisco, I'm driving and I get, multiple calls from my mom the whole time. And I remember asking, okay, well, what does this mean? And she's like, well, she's dilated. And again, at this point, I'm like, okay, dilated means I know something's starting, but I didn't know how early you start dilating.
Right,
I knew nothing.
Right.
So I'm like, okay. The next call, I'm like, okay, well, they're just going to, I thought I was just coming back for moral support.
Right.
Okay, she's going to be she's going to be on bed rest for a while. They're going to monitor her. Next call, my mom says, well, she takes a deep breath. She goes, she's 7 centimeters dilated.
Oh,
and again, I remember thinking,
what does that mean?
7 out of what? 7 out of 100? 7 out of what's the big deal? Not realizing it 10, you're pushing, right?
Yeah.
At 10, the baby's here, right?
There's no turning back.
Yeah. I at that point, I still thought, we're not having a baby. You can't have a baby that early. So fast forward, I arrived at the hospital. All the women in my family are sitting in the waiting room. So I'm so oblivious that I'm going around hugging and kissing all my aunts and cousins and, hello, how are you? Until my aunt Ann, who's, been a rock for us forever, is in there waiting. But my other aunt is like, hey, you got to go. You don't have time. And that's when it was kind of coming to wait, something's going on. A nurse comes out and grabs me, throws me in a room and is like, put these on. And I'm waiting for her to leave the room so I can change into these scrubs. And I didn't even click. Why am I changing into scrubs? And the nurse is like, just put them on over your clothes. So I'm like, okay, I put them on over my clothes. And again, I'm still walking.
Oh my God.
So I walk out the door and I see my aunt, who's the one person my wife asked for who was there. And she comes out fully scrubbed up, head to toe. And she's like, hurry up. And I'm really, okay. So I run into the room. I open the rooms and she's in an operating room. And she's on the table with the doctor next to her and about 20 doctors standing around the room. And I was just kind of frozen. I looked down at my wife and the doctor looks at my wife and says, is this Dad? And she goes, yeah. And she goes, it's time to start pushing. And I was like,
oh my gosh.
And so I'm holding my wife's hand They're like, the doctors are introducing them. I'm so-and-so from UCSF. I'm a, neonatal intensive care, like whatever, like neuro specialist.
Yeah.
I'm, a first year med student. Like, I just came. I'm so-and-so from this other hospital. Like, we've never seen a baby born this early. And they're just going around the room. Like, I'm a, pediatric ophthalmologist or whatever their positions are. And it's just like a blur. So they're prepping us for when she's born, don't be afraid. She might come out blue. She might not be breathing. She might breathe and then her lungs might collapse. So we're just trying to prep you. And so Isabella came out screaming, like, and looking normal, just super small. And I remember we just holding my breath, like waiting for what they said, waiting for it to stop, waiting for horrible things to happen. And nothing. They got her, they put her on the table. They immediately had to intubate her because her lungs weren't developed enough. She reached up and grabbed my hand and was squeezing my hand. I mean, her tiny little fingers. They stabilized her, got her ready for transport, took her on the helicopter to UCSF because that hospital wasn't equipped to deal with the preemie that young.
Right.
And I just remember, like, thank goodness that was our first, because being naive in a situation like that was probably the best thing that could happen to us.
Yeah.
Because it was always honestly, it was very much like, I feel like with football, right? Like, here's what's going to happen next, and being super focused on, okay, you're just going to try to get her to feed. We just need to get her to feed and not have her oxygen go down. We just need to pass this milestone. And that was it. I mean, we were living in Morgan Hill, which was about an hour and a half commute to San Francisco. She was probably the healthiest of all the sick babies in the NICU. So there was no place for us to stay. So we only got to stay for 2 or 3 days. And then every day we were commuting from Morgan Hill to San Francisco to see her.
Okay.
She was in the hospital for about 3 months. She had 2 surgeries when she was there. She had a heart surgery about 3 weeks in. It's called a PDA ligation. Again, like all this stuff, right? We're learning on the fly what it is, how severe these things are. And it was definitely touch and go for a while. We didn't we knew it because they told us, but we never felt that. There was maybe one instance where first surgery, she did great, came out of it. Essentially what they do is when you're in utero, the liquid and stuff can go into your lungs. Right. And then at a certain point, gestational period, your PDA valve closes so that when you're drinking, it doesn't go into your lungs. Well, when they're that early, it doesn't close naturally. So that was a surgery. They have to clamp that off because when they were feeding her, she was essentially drowning. It was all going into her lungs. So they couldn't feed her for, I think, like, it was all IV for at least a week.
Oh my gosh.
Hey Joe, I actually on your note there, so I still have film from when I came to the NICU and we made the visit with Bella. So I've got pictures and film, and I got to get that to you. I mean, it's amazing. Yeah. It's amazing how small she was. Like literally, like in the palm of my hand, like a baby bird. I was just like, holy smokes, dude.
That was after a month, and she had been feeding, and so after that, she had to have eye surgery, because again, when they're that young, all the veins in their eyes aren't fully developed. So because of the steroids and everything they're getting to grow, the veins can basically cross, and they can detach the retina and cause permanent blindness. So they have to go in with the laser and cut all the veins around the eyes. So she's lost a decent amount of peripheral vision, but because she lost it so early, you learn how to adapt without it.
Right.
She ended up having that surgery, and that surgery didn't go well. That was the one time where, as parents, we were really nervous because we were sitting in the waiting room, and I remember, like, at the hospital, we heard a code blue go off, and no idea it was our child.
Right.
And so we're in the waiting room, and all of a sudden they come by with this little baby, and they got the bag, and they're pumping so she could breathe. I think she developed.
Oh my gosh.
And we didn't know it was her. We just saw this
that story. It's crazy.
Baby come by, and they're pumping her lungs and they're breathing for her. She ended up developing sepsis, and they gave her she was so swollen and they had to put an IV in her forehead because they couldn't hit any of the veins. They were all blown out at that point. And she
What a
pulled through
battle,
that.
man. What a battle.
And she ended up pulling through that. And I think about maybe 3 weeks after that, 3 to 4 weeks after that was when we got to bring her home. And she came home on oxygen, but shortly, I mean, within like less than 5 days, she wasn't even on oxygen. And then she just kept hitting every major milestone. I mean, we were told she could be severely, have severe learning disabilities. She's going to be delayed up until she's probably 8. And by the time of her first birthday, she was already hitting every milestone she should have for
That's
a
amazing.
regular one.
So how long was she in the hospital? Like before you brought her home, from the time of birth until
3 months.
Wow.
Yeah. And
That's
exactly
incredible.
right. Because if that happened with our son and we already have a kid, like that's what we started to realize. Like there's parents out there who have kids at home. Like what do you do when your child's, 2 hours away at this hospital, but your kids still have life? They got to go to school. They got practices. They've got everything normal. It was just her. And my job, my wife wasn't working at the time. My job was incredibly flexible. And so it all worked out. I had a huge support system, my family. My sister-in-law was at law school, and she used to go all the time and visit, and just to be there with her. Her nurses were amazing. I mean, those NICU nurses are unbelievable. And so
They are.
Yeah, it was a great support system. I mean, we were incredibly lucky. And I have we have a good friend that we played with who had a son, and unfortunately, it was the same kind of experience. His son didn't make it.
Oh.
Who's that?
And Ryan Ledger, Ethan.
Oh, yeah.
He's got a nonprofit for his son,
Yeah.
Ethan's Hope, which goes to help, families who have the same struggle and their children are NICU, and you want to be there for your child. And so, I mean, that's life, right? Like we were lucky that she pulled through and she made it, but it could have easily gone the other way.
So anything with your son? Was everything fine with him?
So the reason we had a big gap was because we were told that my wife had a blood disorder that caused her to clot, which caused placental abruption and all this stuff. And so we were planning on just having one. So what happened was about 5 years later, we decided, well, should we check with the doctors again and see because if this is it, let's just say this is it, we'll move on. We talked to the doctors and they said, well, a lot of things have changed. There's new research now. That's not the issue. Like you probably would be fine with a baby. And so the only thing that we had to do with my wife was she had to take extra hormone shots that I had to give her, which I hated.
Right.
I do not, after football, I don't like needles anymore. So I had to give her these shots during pregnancy. But the pregnancy was good. He did come out, and I think the umbilical cord was wrapped around his, so he came out blue, not breathing. But within a couple seconds, he took his first
Jesus
breath, and
Christ.
so that was a huge relief. But yeah, no, everything was fine with his, and he's been great. So it's pretty crazy.
And your daughter Bella, she's doing fine now.
Yeah, she's perfectly fine. I mean, she's transitioned. She doesn't really play sports anymore as a freshman, but she did them all when she was younger. She played every sport. She's in choir. She's a singer, so her lungs don't seem to be an issue.
No.
I mean, when she gets sick, she develops bronchitis a little bit easier than the average kid, but she doesn't have a lot of any kind of real residual effects.
It's honestly, dude, it's amazing to see, like, from where she started, seeing her in that little incubator and seeing how small she was and seeing the person that she's become. And
It's
Yeah.
it's truly
it's
a
a
miracle.
crazy journey, dude.
I mean, truly a miracle.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I want to talk about something. Hope you're okay talking about this. So I know I'm kind of shifting. I'm trying to respect your time. Your mom is Italian.
Yep.
Your dad's Portuguese.
And Joe is Mexican.
You're yeah, we don't know how that happened. No, your father's Portuguese and your wife is white, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Okay, so race is such a big topic in the news, and it's interesting because my boys are in middle school, and I never really talked to them about race. Never identified anybody as race, any of their peers.
Yeah.
I really don't think they saw race until they were exposed to it in the school system by the teachers actually talking then, about it. Because I think they just saw oh, that's another kid wearing a blue shirt. That one's, Roger, who's wearing a Nike shirt. And they just, that's kids, right?
Yeah.
And I think it was kind of the school system that exposed them to it, which, I mean, that's fine. But with race with your children, I mean, I'd love to know, do you talk to them about it? And what are those conversations like?
Yes. Yes, we do, but it's definitely changed from the conversations I had. And I think the biggest thing is like, so for instance, my dad, when you mentioned like my dad's Portuguese, right? Even this story has changed through our history. So the Fernandez, the reason why like it's mentioned that it's Portuguese is because our name actually used to be spelled with an S, which is Portuguese. But we weren't necessarily Portuguese. It was just when Portugal had slaves, they were given the names of their masters. So that was the last name that we had. Okay. When we migrated, it got changed to a Z because I believe the story was it was easier to immigrate from like a Latin culture than it was from Portugal. And so that's just what happened. Huh. Just from that aspect, right? Like the history that we have doesn't really exist because we're black, right? Like you can't even trace it back purely because of race, not anything else, right? It's just because of race. That's why we don't have the same history that my mom has as an Italian. And so it's like, I think there's layers to it, right? And so I remember when I went to school and this was very prevalent. Like I would say, I think the George Floyd, murder, like really opened a lot of people's eyes. And so a lot of the topics were like, people would talk about like the conversation, right? Mm-hmm. Or the topic for an African-American family, which would be, hey, you realize like almost every parent knows what that means. I knew exactly what that meant. I remember being younger and my mom having to explain to me, Joey, your friends will see, as like, they'll look at you differently. It's not that you are different. And I remember her having the conversation about you have to act this way. You have to behave this way because you're not going to be given the same leeway that your friends are. And it was necessary. I mean, my brother and I, when my dad was, like obviously he was in the NFL, but he'd retired. We still had money. We still had money. Like even though he worked at driver, we still had money. Right. And I remember my brother was driving when he first got his license. I was in the car. My dad had a BMW 750. He had a sweet like raised Bronco with like it was awesome. Every time my brother would drive, he'd get pulled over all the time. I can distinctly remember being pulled out of the car and being asked to sit on a curb in this area of Willow Glen, which is this very nice area. And until we said that, we were asked, whose car is this? My dad. What's your dad do? He plays in the NFL. Yeah, right. And then they check and they go, okay, you're free to go. We weren't even stopped for speeding or anything. We just got pulled over. Oh my gosh. In our own neighborhood. And so I get what my mom was trying to teach us because without having that understanding of not being, given the same leeway that our friends might, we might act just like our friends wouldn't act out. I mean, I can remember being on field trips and being in the back of the car with my friends' parents who, were big deals in the area we lived in San Jose and yelling at police officers when they got pulled over and saying, do you know who I am? Here's my little, 1911, like whatever my foundation thing is. And I got to get these kids. It's like, we couldn't do that. My dad couldn't yell at a police officer like that. But then fast forward to, I think, your question. Now I've got my kids. And I remember when my daughter was starting, I was fortunate enough that my goal was always to try to recreate what I had, which, the Bay Area is very expensive now. And so it was a very hard thing to be able to buy our first house in the same type of neighborhood area that we lived in. And then on top of that, sending my kids to the same school, private school that I went to. My daughter was there. And I remember thinking, okay, it's just getting time for that talk. And I believe it was around everything happening with George Floyd. And I remember telling my wife, no, I'm not going to have the same conversation because I'm just going to keep perpetuating this. Like, because what I saw was none of my friends needed to play the game. And when I went to Fresno State, I tell people the story now all the time is like, my friends at Fresno State that I played with who came up from tough upbringings, who had got in trouble or had a DUI, got into a fight, at a frat party and had some kind of ding on their records. Like, what are they doing now? Well, they, some maybe went into coaching. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but like their ceilings dropped a lot from those dings. And then I would go, what happened to my friends who got sent to rehab in high school and got DUIs in high school and got their licenses taken away? They're running their parents' company right now. I mean, it's this. That's what happened. And I remember thinking, why does my daughter have to play this game when no one else has to? And if I teach her that she has to play the game, then what am I doing? Right.
Great point.
And so that's kind of when you talk about being a girl dad, I started to think like she needs to have confidence in who she is. Now she's always lived in mostly affluent areas. Most of her friends are white. And she understands race. And I think the biggest thing for her is just keeping an open conversation. So when she feels uncomfortable, she feels like she doesn't fit in, that she can have a conversation about it. But she doesn't have to pretend to be someone she's not just to get ahead in this world, right? She can be herself, and that's okay. And I need to support that as opposed to, telling her, well, don't act this way. Don't dress that way. Don't do this. I need to be the one to support her or anyone else who chooses to express themselves in any way, right? And it's like that kind of bled into just overall, right, in the world of LGBTQ and any other aspect, right? Of I grew up as a biracial kid who, like, Adam jokes, but most people probably wouldn't even say that I'm black. They, with my last name, with my skin tone, would think I'm Mexican. But
hey, dude, on that note, like he became
but real
one
quick
of the...
though, Joe, that's beautiful. I mean, that's absolutely beautiful. And gosh, I mean, what an amazing dad. I love that.
Yeah.
Definitely.
And my son definitely looks more, my daughter looks more like me. You could tell she's ethnic. My son's got stick straight hair, looks more like my wife. I mean, my wife and my daughter would always be asked, like, are you the nanny? Like, no one thought she was her mom.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And it was pretty normal, like, especially where we were at. No one thought that. With my son, it hasn't been a thing. And I think for us, it's just kind of, I don't want to say getting over it, but not just understanding that sometimes people aren't exposed to that. And that's one thing that, Adam and I talked a lot about, is just, it's different. It's very different in California than other places too. It's different in the Bay Area than other parts. It's just being exposed to different things. Don't
you think though, or I see it with my kids and I kind of alluded to this with their friends, race is not, it's not even a subject really amongst themselves.
Right.
Which is beautiful. I mean, I think it's absolutely beautiful that, they don't, I don't know. They don't say, pick a name, Sam, and say there's two Sams. Yeah. The African-American Sam or the black Sam, they just don't. I mean, and I think that's, they'll say, Sam that lives over on 14th Street. I'm like, oh, okay. Or Sam, you were talking to his dad the other day. Oh, okay. And I think there's not that defining by race, which I think is beautiful, and holding out hope that just builds through the years too. And
I would agree.
I
would absolutely agree. I think especially as I see my daughter getting older, and in high school now, there's a lot of different races that are around. And I think it's just, they're exposed to a lot of this stuff early on, right? Like the first time they see a black person isn't necessarily on TV anymore, right? Like they see them now more often in their neighborhoods, or you see, and I think when you have that, it's one of those things that it becomes less of an identifying factor. Like it might be for the individual for a sense of pride or heritage or something that they feel, but it's not, to your point. I don't think I don't think race for kids is as big of an issue as maybe it has been in the past, which, kudos to parents, because in the past it was, my parents, no one wanted my parents to get married. Their families didn't want them to get married, right? And my wife and I didn't have that same issue. And that's just one generation, right, from each other. In fact, when I told that story about Coach Hill, they went to Utah. They were already married. My mom tells a story. They were in a grocery store and a kid comes up to my dad and starts rubbing his arm, looks at his mom and says, "Mom, it's not coming off."
Are you serious?
Yeah, and the mom didn't say anything.
That's pretty cool.
And so, but it wasn't like, it wasn't even, and here's the thing, right? What's my dad going to do? Get mad and put the kid in check? Then my dad's just a college kid, right? I mean, who knows who that person was and who they're connected to and what that could have meant for my dad. So Coach Hill ended up finding a note on my dad's door saying, "Sorry, this ain't working out." And they left and came back to San Jose. And that's how he ended up at San Jose State. It was the experience they had when they went to Utah. And
wow,
it's very different, right? I mean, I think everyone's experience in life is different. And so
that's why he left Utah.
Yeah.
Wow. No, I mean,
yeah. And like
I understand.
They said, I will say this too. They said, back in the day, right? Like you can have, these guys were watering fields at business centers as their summer job that had automatic sprinklers, right? Like that's
right.
These were these times. So when my mom came in, she was a good student and she was going to have a career. Like they were going to help her with the job and this and that. And essentially her job was showing all the players like rookies around on their recruiting trip. I mean, she was severely downgraded because of who she was married to, and what she could do. And, this is a 19-year-old, kids.
Dude, I didn't know about the Utah stuff. That's crazy.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, it wasn't any, like, I don't want to say it wasn't anything it was a big deal, obviously, to them, big enough that, like, they just didn't feel comfortable there.
So, Adam and I started this. It was something that was in my head for a few years. And Adam and I, just through different things in life, we were talking about things, and I told him about this idea and just really spotlighting dads and really the profound impact that dads can have in the healthy development of their children, right? And physically, mentally, emotionally. And, we're coming off a weekend here in Atlanta where I think there were 3 teens killed, 2 separate shootings. A couple weekends before that, there were, I think, 2 or 3 more. It's all the time. And it's these young teens, mostly guys, but sometimes it's girls, and it's teens shooting teens. And it's not, Adam and I are in Atlanta. It's not just an Atlanta problem. It's an everywhere problem. I mean, it's your small town USA. It's the Bay Area. It's everywhere. And, it's horrible. It's horrible with these kids. I mean, taken away so young, and then the ones doing it and just having no thoughts about it, and nothing about the repercussions. I'd love to know your thoughts, maybe the root behind it, what's there, what's missing. Look, I mean, shootings have always happened. I mean, they were happening 15, 20 years ago, and you can argue and say that, all right, well, now because of the internet, we're more aware. I don't think so. I think there's more of them today. And just, I would love to, to hear what you think and kind of what's behind it. I mean, I have my theories, but
it just seems to me like in all facets of our lives, like the ante's been upped. I mean, I just think about, like, when you were asking about how is it being a girl dad? It's unbelievable it's unbelievable the things that these kids are exposed to at the age that they are.
Yeah.
And so, to your point, Robert, like, these shootings were happening. They were happening before. But if everything else in our world, right? If the average adolescents would get sexual, like, I don't know what the stats are, but like if they were sexually active at 15, they're sexually active at 12 today. If they would get into guns or gangs at this age, they're getting into it younger.
Yeah. And
typically all these, to me, everything that our society has as far as intervention is built for a certain age, right? You're not doing interventions with 6 and 7 year olds. You're doing it when typically it's already too late. And if the ante's already been up that it's happening that much sooner, it's no wonder these numbers are going up. I don't know why someone wants to pick up a gun. I don't know why people have such a disregard for human life. I mean, that's one of the things that for the life of me, right? I mean, you make those decisions, like, you're not coming back, right?
No.
You do that, your life, the lives of everyone else. I mean, the domino effect that happens when someone takes a life, it impacts so many people. And yeah, to your point, to see it happening time and time again. And I think the most disheartening is, like, it's just this blatant disregard, and it might not be, right? I mean, now we see it. I think we all see it a lot more with, like, even the school stuff. It's not just your typical, oh, well, that gang member over there shot another rival gang. It's Jimmy at school who was at all my kids', birthday parties, just killed 16 people.
Yeah.
I mean,
I wonder.
I will add. So, Rob, I've got. So I rarely watch the news, but I saw the report. I mean, I think I was up at like 6 one day, and I saw the report on what happened, and it was like these two kids got into a beef on social media, went back and forth, and then one of them came over to the apartment complex, and they had a shootout. So 2 kids died, and 2 kids got injured. So somebody shot a girl too. So there was like a 15-year-old girl got shot. And I'm just like, social media, embarrassment, exposure to that. I mean, and these kids being in their adolescence with hormones and everything, like, they just they do not care. They show up and start shooting people. It's crazy to me. Blows my mind.
Yeah, and I just, I don't know, I mean, the schools and everybody fighting so bad. Is fighting really that bad? I mean, I hate to say that, but
right.
Maybe we didn't see it as much then because, I mean, when I'm definitely a good bit older than both of you guys, but nobody ever. And look, I grew up in a time in lower Mississippi.
It was back in the 20s.
And there were people had guns in their back windows of their truck, and they would leave their, doors unlocked in their cars while they would go into the grocery store. Nobody would have thought of it. I mean, and even when I still remember, in high school when you would all go meet up at this field or this, this dead end, this cul-de-sac where there weren't any houses and everybody'd meet up. And somebody would have a shotgun or a rifle, I'm sure, in their car because of hunting season. And nobody ever would have thought about going to do that. And, of pulling out a gun. And now it's just they just do it. And I can't say that, okay, it's guns because guns are more prevalent. I mean, they were easy then. I mean, you could walk into
if not easier, right?
Yeah.
Easier,
I mean, you could walk into, any store and buy guns. I mean, I remember a gas station, there used to be bullets and stuff that you could buy there. And it's just Joe, kind of going back to it, I think a lot of it is the lack of fathers. And not saying there weren't that there were always fathers then, but there was more of a male presence. And, I wonder if that's your thoughts on if that's had somewhat of an impact of less father figures in their lives, and maybe somebody to hit them on the back of the head and tell them, don't be stupid, you're acting like an idiot. And what do you, I don't know.
Yeah. I believe that I think a big thing is I've become a lot, I don't know if advocate is the right word, but just understanding, like, to me, anyone who does anything like that, there is something wrong.
Yeah.
Right? Like, and I don't know if necessarily having a father figure or 2 parents or however that dynamic is the answer, as much as just someone who can identify in their kid, like, what is going on with them? Why are they struggling so much? Why would they even think to do this? Right? And to me, it's, if someone takes someone's life, mentally there's something wrong with you, right? Like you're not operating on the same bandwidth of someone who, like you said, back in the day would never think about grabbing this gun and ending someone's life. But the story Adam just told, mentally, there's something wrong with you.
Oh, absolutely.
When you fight with someone online and decide that the answer to that is, now I'm going to go and take my gun and shoot people, and not realize that any of these other things are out there. Because the way I see it is, people know right from wrong. Like you know you shouldn't do that. But the how quickly you snap, and instead of like you're talking about, instead of as friends just getting into a scuffle and having a fight, someone runs and grabs a gun and decides to shoot someone.
Right.
Because whether it's gun violence amongst other people, whether it's suicide, whether it's the lack of I don't know what the word, like compassion or understanding for just life seems to be like going away. And I don't know. I mean, I do think having a father figure in the house, having someone who you can look at as a model, is incredibly beneficial for any young person. But I also think that having people who can just be there for someone.
Yeah, absolutely. Whether it's a coach, whoever it is.
Right.
Yeah. And
it is sad. I mean, it's such a sad thing that you see, because you can't get these lives back. And as a parent, I mean, I couldn't imagine being on either end of that. Like even those people who are doing the shootings, they have parents.
You know, we're born as animals, right? I mean, you have to be, you're taught not to pinch, not to hit, not to pull hair, not to bite. You're taught to share. You know, you're taught all these things. And it kind of goes back, I can't remember where I originally heard this, but undisciplined children become undisciplined adults. And undisciplined adults, you either end up in prison or in the hospital or dead. And, I mean, there's so much truth to that. You know, I mean, a lot of it does go back to the parenting. And I agree with you. I mean, I don't think it means there has to be a father figure in the house, but a strong male model somewhere, you know, actively involved in their life. I mean, Adam, you're a great example of that as well. And, you know, I mean, you've spoken about that also with the father figures in your life that kind of taking you under the wing. All right. We've gotten pretty dark. Let's lighten it up. All right. So both former receivers here. I'm going to ask you guys, current receivers in the league, who do you guys enjoy watching?
Joe, you go ahead, man. You're the real wideout here.
I mean, because I had a dad who played in the NFL, I've always kind of been attracted to people that I feel some type of connection to, and maybe this is just an easy one, but like Davante Adams to me is just is amazing to watch. He actually reminds me, when I watch him, he reminds me of my dad. He's smooth. Yeah. He's fast. His hands are unbelievable.
Unbelievable.
It's just his approach to the game and how long he's been doing it, the hits he's taken and hung on to the ball. I hope he doesn't take any more that big. But like it is just amazing for me to watch him. I mean, there's a bunch of other incredibly talented people that make great catches, but the way he plays the game, I love watching him, and his lack of talk, I think, is the biggest thing.
I love that. I love that. He's out there, he's doing his job and putting up results. Absolutely. Yep. Adam, what about you?
So I mean, I love Davante. Like, obviously being a Fresno State Bulldog. I mean, just got his jersey retired. Incredible player. There are two kids out of LSU that are just amazing players. And Jamar Chase and Justin Jefferson, those two are just, I mean, they're going to be the wave of guys coming behind Davante. And those two are just world beaters, is what I'd call them.
Totally agree.
They can beat everybody in the world. So I love watching those guys play football. They've got all the tools to win, and they've got great attitudes as well. So those are the guys. Those are the guys I'd lean in on, say, or the next best receivers in the league.
Yeah, totally agree. All right, tell me about the transfer portal. Thoughts?
I think it's bullshit.
I do. I mean, honestly,
I honestly do. Yeah, sorry. Go ahead, Jim.
I I do too. The idea of having a transfer portal, to me, it just doesn't make sense. Now, that being said, I do believe now it's kind of, and I think this is where college football is headed. It's almost a necessity to give some power back to these student athletes, because ideally college football, in my opinion, wouldn't be a massive business, but it is.
That's huge.
And so to take players now who have to grow up so fast and make these decisions, like, we're all in the professional world. If you work for a firm that didn't have the products that you guys needed to sell to get the clients, you would quit your job and go.
Right.
But the way college football is now, if you find yourself in a situation where your quarterback goes down, you don't have anything, you're supposed to stay and play when that's going to cost you your career. It makes no sense. So it's almost like they forced the hand that it almost has to be done for these players, in my opinion. I just wish it wasn't there, because, the school pride, signing an actual scholarship where you're committing yourself to them. And back in the day, it was like the only way you can get out is if you graduated in 4 years and then you can immediately transfer, or if you sat out. So there was some kind of, carrot to say, okay, well, if this is what you really want to do, then you've got to do essentially what you're here for, right? You've got to finish what you started with school, and then it's up to you. It's like the reward for being able to do that. I love that. For me, I wanted to hurry up and finish in 4 so I can start, because I redshirted, so I can start my master's. I kind of looked at it when I played, like, how do I take advantage of this as much as possible?
Yeah, that's interesting. Now you see so many kids, I can't remember, even over 1,000 in the transfer portal, and the ones that even get stuck, and they're jumping because I didn't get a chance to play, I didn't get a chance to start, and then a lot of them, when they do end up somewhere, they're in the same position, or they're stuck in the portal. I mean, it's it'll be interesting to see the way that shakes out in the next couple of years. I think there needs to, need to kind of get their hands around that a little bit more. All right, what about the NIL?
Honestly, same kind of feeling. Is as a concept of it, I don't like it. I don't agree, but I don't agree from the standpoint of, if college sports is really supposed to be an amateur game, then keep it an amateur game. That means you don't pay coaches millions of dollars to come coach your school. Everyone has a standard salary, just like everyone has a standard scholarship. But as soon as you start giving the advantage to the schools or the coaches or anything else, my big, as a player, it's like, well, don't leave us out of the mix. Because for me, the way I see it, and I've had this conversation with a few different players, coming from the schools I came from, I've heard this argument. Oh, you're going to give a kid millions of dollars when they're 18. What are they going to do with it? Well, coming from the schools I came from, I can tell you I would have been set up way better for life if you gave me the opportunity to have an NIL contract. Yeah. Because I learned this stuff at an early age. But that's life, right? To other people who don't, who end up with a bunch of money, it's not like they don't allow poor people to win the lottery. Right. If you're able to play, you get to play. And if you win, if you mess it up, it's on you. So to me, it's like, the fact that it's out there, I think it's a good thing, because it gives these players an opportunity to chance. I think what needs to catch up is educating these players. And unfortunately, this is what I don't think is a good thing, but I think it is where we're at. These kids have to grow up so much sooner. I mean, Adam and I used to talk about this. It's like, oh, we're scholar athletes. And it's like, but come on, we're athletes first, then we're students. That's how it's always looked at. Now there's no gray area. You're an athlete before you're a student. With the transfer portal, with NIL, it's right out there in front of you. So if that's what you're going to change the game to, then what really needs to happen is, just like when we went into the NFL, and I remember, and I'm sure, Adam, it happened for you probably at the rookie symposium. For me, it was just, in Seattle. But they have the finance guy come in and say, hey, here's a standard contract, and let me show you how it works. You take, 10% for your agent. Then you got your taxes. And then, now here's my story, right? I remember the guy saying, and then, you want to buy a house. So we'll cut we'll take that one off. Or you want to buy your mom a house and you want to get a chain. And I remember thinking, the hell do I want a chain for? I want to put money in a retirement account because it's going to compound interest. Like, what are you talking about? I remember being so offended. Like, why do you expect me to go out and buy a diamond chain?
I was buying fake diamonds at Nordstrom. Let me tell you that right now.
Like, you know what I mean? It's like, but they waited for that till you got to the NFL to have that conversation, and even when they had it, it was. I mean, and it's such a. I mean, I'm in financial services.
Like on the NIL thing. I think it's a really good thing because I think it's been going on for a long time. So people getting paid under the table. You know, I'm almost certain that guys in the SEC we're getting paid handsomely, and nobody's going to tell if you're in Alabama and you get paid. And somebody rats on you, or somebody rats on the person that paid you, you're probably getting your house burned down. So it's good. Like it's like really like they're that close knit. Like you're getting your house burned down.
Payment in sports has always been there. I mean, I do agree. I mean, whether it's a $100 handshake, whatever. I mean, it's always, doing some summer job where, sort of as you spoke about it. I mean, of watering the grass when there's a sprinkler. I mean,
I worked at Boomers.
I mean,
Boomers is
I remember I remember back in school and some of the summer jobs the players had, and they'd come back with a sports car. It's like, how'd you get that? And, oh, summer jobs. And they'd tell me like, yeah, whatever. I was washing cars for this dealership over the summer. And saved up enough money. I'm like, hell no, you didn't.
No way.
Joe, look, I cannot thank you enough for spending the time with us this afternoon. I really can't. And it has been a pleasure talking to you as well as meeting you. And thank you again for taking time out of your day. And love for you to try to work your channels and maybe get your dad on here one day. And would love to meet him. Would love to, hear stories from him as well.
Yeah.
And but thank you so much.
Cool.
And
thank you, Joe.
Look, want to thank you all for listening to Dad to Dad's podcast. You can find us on Spotify or Apple Podcasts as well as on YouTube and Instagram. And don't forget to hit the like button and don't miss any episodes. We will see you all next week.
Thank you.
Thanks, Joe.